John, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
John, can you hear me okay?
All right, we're ready to begin.
It is 6 o'clock and I'm gonna call this joint work session with Lacey City Council and our Planning Commission meeting order. It's February 9th. We have an agenda. Can I get a motion to approve?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
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 Is there anyone opposed? And that motion unanimously carries. And we have an agenda. Before we go around and get right into our agenda, let's do some introductions. Let's start there.
Hi, I'm Kathy Garcia. I am a new planning commissioner, but an old planning commissioner because I served on the commission a few years back. So nice to see everybody for those.
Mark Meininger, Planning Commission for about 4 years.
Hi, Carolyn Cox, City Council. I'm starting my 6th year.
Carrie McMichael, Planning Commissioner.
Lenny Greenstein, Council. I have to clearly work the microphone. I'm Gail Madden. I'm in my third year, 2 sessions on the Planning Commission. So I'm apparently trainable, but it takes me a long time.
I'm Hans Shepard. I'm a senior long-range planner at the city.
Ryan Andrews, Planning Manager, staff to the Planning Commission.
Dave Wasson, Chair of the Planning Commission.
Your Public Works Director. Rob Almada, Chief of Police.
Hi, Jen Burbidge, Director of Parks, Culture, and Recreation for the city.
Eddie Bishop, Planning Commission.
Michael Stedman, prior Planning Commissioner and 3rd term council member.
Peg Evans Brown. This is my 7th year and my last year on the Planning Commission. And I've very much enjoyed it and appreciate it. And thank you all.
Thanks.
Daphne Retzloff, Planning Commission, 4th year.
Ed Kunkel, Council.
Malcolm Miller, Deputy Mayor.
Rick Walk, interim city manager.
And online, you want to go, Robin?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Robin Vasquez, previous Planning Commission member and current Lacey City Council member. Sorry, I can't be there in person, but this is sort of familiar because I was remote the whole time I was on the Planning Commission. So it's nice to see your faces on the screen.
Troy?
Move finance director for the city.
And Grant?
Grant Beck, Planning and Development Services Manager, and eagerly awaiting to get Rick back.
And I'm Andy Ryder, the mayor of Lacey, and I've been here for as long as I can remember, it seems like. So first up on our agenda is our quarterly construction update. And Grant, it's the Grant show for a lot of today.
It's actually, I'm going to share the wealth a little bit and be brief in my presentation, and Hans will be doing the joint planning presentation. And yes, Dave, I can be brief. So, all right. Hopefully you'll see that 2022 was a year of change last year. And what I'd like to do tonight is not the in-depth what the projects are in the queue kind of presentation tonight, but just rather look back at 2022 and give you a sense of how it went. And you do see the screen, right? Okay. So the first big change we came across was the switch from our 19-year-old software Naviline to Track It, which, as we all know, that's never an easy process. And thank everybody who worked on it so long before I got here to make it possible. We switched over in June. The basic software itself, we're really starting to use the features now that are built into it. We're getting away from the old Naviline way of doing things and restructuring our processes, and it's much better at workflow management. So we can now do reviews all at the same time rather than sequentially when a project comes in and gets routed around. A lot easier access to data. In fact, it's so easy that the city manager was able to find a permit the other day. So the inspectors are using iPads to log all their inspections right out in the field, and it's pretty cool. It'll actually route them for the day, and it has a mapping feature so they know the direction, and is pretty much real time as they do their stuff during the day. And at the same time, this isn't really Track It related, but at the same time, because Track It has an online portal and kind of acts as a records management system, a limited records management system, we've started converting all of our application processes over to digital. Currently, all the land use applications are being taken and processed that way, and we're working on the building side of things right now. The other thing it came with is an online permitting portal, and you've seen this demonstrated before, but we have some data now, which is pretty cool. For the first time, we can take online permits and payments over the line, but before we got this system, we didn't take any sort of credit cards or ACHs or anything. So right now, as of this morning, in fact, we have 292 contractors signed up in our portal to be able to submit applications online through the portal. Since we went live around June, we've had 940 credit card payments. I think in the long time before that, we had zero. $733,000. Troy, this is for you. $730,000 was credit card payments, and we even had a couple ACHs or e-checks that came in. So we set that up primarily so the system can be used on the bigger ticket items like building permit payments and system development charges and that kind of thing. We also had significant staff changes. In June, Marcy Price retired. She worked at the front counter for years and was instrumental in getting the Track It conversion done. And I know she's watching from California, so I'd just like to say thank you for everything you've done to get us where we are. July 1st, we lost another longtime employee, Leah Bender. The customer service is a tough environment, and both Leah and Cindy did it for many, many years. And Leah moved on to another position where a lot less stress. And from everything we've heard is really happy. We're happy for her. And Cindy retired in September. Same situation. We really appreciate her dedication to the city, and hope she's enjoying herself in retirement. But that brought us two new people, Sarah Bartz and Luca Village, are now permit technicians. We were able to reclassify those positions. So the permit techs will actually be doing quite a bit of the kind of the checking for completeness and a lot of the over the counter and more straightforward permits that don't require a plan review. And I don't know if you've gone by the front counter in a while, but you will hear a lot of good music, and Sarah's a chair dancer, so they're amazing and doing a good job. Just fit right in with the culture of the department. So we're really happy to have them on board. And soon, we're also going to have a senior project planner. That's a reclassification of Marcy's old position. And that's really designed to be a kind of a planning analyst and do a lot of the research, bill tracking, all the stuff that we don't have bandwidth to do with day-to-day brush fires and everything. And it probably, Rick will be using that position quite a bit for special projects and stuff. And then shortly, the job notices should be out fairly quickly, I would suspect. We'll be interviewing for the sustainability coordinator and the housing coordinator. That we really appreciate the council and city manager Scott Spence for authorizing those positions, and you'll see why in a little bit when we kind of look back at the rest of the year. So two big changes in programs that we've been going through, and I'm going to look to Councilmember Cox, who's on both these groups, to verify my statements here. But both the Regional Housing Council and the Climate Action Steering Committee went through significant changes last year. The Regional Housing Council was formed last year, and it's been, the normal process for getting a new group up is forming, storming, norming, and performing. And I think we got through the forming and most of the storming phase on the Regional Housing Council setting up. There's still some way to go to norm, but that was a heavy lift on the part of Rick, Ryan, and a lot of other staff chipped in on that. But Rick and Ryan were the leads on that. The Climate Action Steering Committee really transformed, and you'll see that shortly as we bring forth a new interlocal agreement on how we work together as a region to work on climate action policies. I think we're a little further along in that process than the Regional Housing Council, but the jurisdictional staff members spent a good part of the latter half of the year sitting down together and figuring out how to be effective at moving these initiatives forward. And it really helped with in both these. It's going to be nice to have those new positions come on so we can kind of hand those off and go into norming and performing mode with them. So again, we really appreciate those positions. And Councilmember Cox, is that a fair analysis of where we are?
I think so, yes. I will say we're in the midst of doing interviews now for the two new advisory boards that the Regional Housing Council is standing up. We'll do the last of them tomorrow and hopefully have a list of recommendations by next week's meeting on the 15th of the Regional Housing Council. So,
yep. And I'm sorry.
Well, it's a significant part of the transformation that Grant is describing.
Rick, when do you think we'll have those positions filled?
Well, as Grant mentioned, they'll be going out for publication or advertisement here in the next week or two. Generally, we'll have about a 3-week posting and then take a look at who we get for candidates, and we go through the interview process. So, we're looking at mid-April of having a selection, and then be able to onboard those individuals. We find a successful candidate.
All right, now down to the numbers, the data. This is our, we'll keep updating this as we go, and it will be a standard chart for you to take a look at. But this is where we are on housing starts for 2022. 413 multifamily units were out the door, and these are permitted. So there's many more in process, under construction, or in the land use permitting phase. And 53 single family dwellings, which looks like is at least a 7-year low. Is that 7-8 years? But the number of units created remains significant. So And on commercial and industrial applications, a pretty typical year for us. These don't include all the, you'll see some of the stats on the more minor permits later on, but this is where we landed for 2022 with commercial and industrial. And then on the land use side, the blue is applications that we've received, and the green is applications that we've acted on within the past year. And we kind of do it that way because land use permits tend to cross annual boundaries quite a bit with the review process. So you can see we're about the same on higher on quasi judicial, more administrative permits issued, and not quite as many administrative permits issued, but many more came in last year. So it's been busy over in the land use side of the house, as well as the construction side, and we continue to keep up with our timelines and our customer service levels. So, which is a testament to everybody in the department. And then kind of the more one-offs. You can see it doesn't swing a whole lot. I did start the inspections are hard to pull out of Naviline, but I did. It's easier to pull it out of Track It because it's more data friendly. But yeah, almost 6,500 field inspections last year by the construction team, and a little bit of those are the planners as well, but mostly construction guys. And if you recall from last year's slide, the 68 pre-application meetings this year not only turns into land use applications, hopefully, that we can process, but that's a team sport, as is everything we do. So that's a lot of time and investment by public works staff, the construction team, and the land use team to get the information to people before they make the application. And really what we want to do, and I think Rick got to this a little bit in one of the permitting kind of process presentations he did last year. It may feel like the hearing examiner's a rubber stamp, but that's not true. We do everything we can to remove the gotchas, remove anything that is inconsistent with the code, working with the development community before it ever gets to the review process. So there's a lot of work in the background that goes into, and we're proud of this, being able to recommend approval of a development project the vast majority of the time. And because we get them to a place where they're consistent with our codes. And that was it. I should have put a thank you slide in there, but that's it. If there's any questions while I try to figure out how to unshare, I'd be happy to answer them.
Are there any questions from the council or planning commission on what's presented? So, Grant, I have a question. It's great that we have our new online system that's making it more streamlined. But even as the mayor of Lacey, I sometimes have no idea when a permit is required and when it's not.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't know when it's required, I'm pretty sure the average citizen doesn't know it either. And so I feel like we need to do a little bit better job of pushing out some information on when a permit's required. You know, one of the things that we do is when a new business comes to town, I sign a letter, welcome them to town and saying, here's some resources. Maybe I was just thinking, maybe we need to add, if you ever need a permit or you have a question about permits, here's some information. And the other place we could probably push out is, through our utility bills and several, any place else. But I mean, it's so hard to know when you would need a permit, and so what you're hoping on is when you hire someone, the contractor knows. But if the contractor doesn't say anything, which is sometimes the contractor won't say anything, then you're like, okay, everything's fine. And so can you speak to that? You know, what do you think we can do to push out information on, to the general public on when you need a permit?
We're, it's in process, and I think we got a little bit sidetracked with some of the the switching around and Rick being over in the city manager's office. But I can tell you that both Luca and Sarah are working hard at doing just that kind of thing for little brochures. In fact, Sarah Bartz was showing us at our current planning meeting this morning about a checklist she's done for sign permits, I believe it was. And the other thing that I just haven't had the chance to, the time to tackle in detail is, we're still on Kelly Adams' list to work with to update our entire website pages. And that'll be a significant part of that. And as we've already started having the discussions between departments on having kind of a landing page for permits of all sorts, because oftentimes, to your point, people don't come in and think I need a street tree permit. That'd be Public Works. They just know they want to put a tree in the right of way. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. We've been working with Scott and his team, and hopefully when Kelly kind of gets done with the Public Works side of things, we're next on the list to really dive in and clean up the website and make sure all that's there.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
So it's coming.
Everything is always a work in progress. I'm a big believer in constant process improvement. So you're never done with it.
That information has always been there, and it's always evolved over time as we get new technology, new information. You can even do video shorts for public information, but also too, a phone call or an email away. We got, there's other ways that somebody has a question. My advice is, if you're thinking you're going to do something, check with us. We're not there to be punitive. We're just here to be helpful. And if you don't need a permit, we won't try to figure out a way for you to require a permit, but we'll just want to help that guidance. Like Grant was referring to, some people don't realize that maybe switching out a water heater requires a permit. And it's a very simple permit. It's but it's just to make sure that it's secured properly and doesn't have any future problems with falling off its pedestal or those type of things. And so exactly. So just trying to always having to adapt to what the customer or the public needs in information sources and channels, and keep that information out. But as Grant said, the department staff, the front counter staff, Luca and Sarah, are very good at responding to those questions and helping people through that process.
Great.
If I can add, also, doing residential and commercial property management and ownership, it's also for your protection. With the recent earthquake in Turkey and Syria, I mean, you don't want your water heater falling off a pedestal. You want to be earthquake braced, all that. So it's, buyer beware. That is just a protection.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
And if I could, I just remember, we've been playing Columbo all day and just kind of remembering things as we go around along. But I forgot to give a shout out on the staff turnover slide. You notice that there was nobody at the front counter, trained at the front counter for a couple months, and there was another vacation in there as well. And everybody in the department, but particularly the construction team, and particularly Dylan Call and Kevin Swink, really stepped up and helped us fill that gap. And I guess Ryan had some time up there too, didn't he? But it was just a great example of teamwork and everybody pitching in to make it through what was a very tough time with all the changes.
Great.
So, sorry about that, and thank you.
No problem. Let's go on to our next agenda item, which is the joint plan with Thurston County.
Okay, so the joint planning with Thurston County is something that we've been kind of going back and forth on for quite a few years, but our goal here, yeah, I'll switch over, is to update the joint plan this year and actually get something adopted. And really just at a high level, what the joint plan is it governs our urban growth areas. So locations that are currently unincorporated, but are designated for future incorporation. And really the intent there is just to prepare those locations so that at time of incorporation, it's a lot more of a seamless process and we're not trying to blend multiple different codes and regulations and things. So for the folks that actually live in these locations, it's as seamless and predictable as possible. So that's kind of what the joint plan is at a high level. See if I can use this mouse at this distance. There we go. And you guys are right in front of the timeline there. This is kind of a working timeline that we've put together of what this process is going to look like. It's an early kickoff of this year already. So we pulled together a public participation plan that just kind of outlines how we're going to engage the community when we're going to go out for specific topics and feedback. And then we've already stood up the beginnings of a project website, which is going to be kind of the landing page for everything, all the content that's related to this project, and also kind of a clearinghouse for documents as we kind of put them up and make them available. So really kind of transparency in that sense that everything's going to be available in one spot that folks can view and review and provide comments and feedback on. And then moving forward, there's some initial outreach early on in the spring, and then moving into public workshops that are kind of intermingled throughout. At the same time that these outreach efforts are going on, there's also going to be stakeholder interviews, other kind of initial drafts that are being developed. SEPA process is going to get going. And then we're going to present to everybody here that's in this room as far as just what we've heard kind of at different phases along the way as well, just giving everyone updates so you're all in the loop on how things are progressing, what feedback we've heard, and how that's being incorporated into the plan. And then refinement in summer, and then additional outreach later on in summer and fall with a target adoption in fall of 2023 is kind of the timeline that we're working on at this point. So that's a high level. It's not my mouse is here. And then, oh, jump forward too far. There we go. So I did throw this page up there. It's related plans and updates. And I wanted to include this one just because it does identify a range of other documents or plans that are either in the works or have recently been adopted. And borrowing from Grant, everything's kind of related to everything, and planning is plagiarism in some sense. So a lot of these documents have already done a significant amount of legwork. They're already really kind of delved deep into different sections of what is going to be contained within the joint plan. So a lot of the content that's already in these documents is going to be borrowed and used to further inform the joint plan as we move forward. And also outreach is going to be kind of double. We're going to utilize some of the outreach that's taking place as part of these plans as well, and incorporating that into the feedback that we heard and will hear for the joint plan. So that's that rundown there. But you can see that there's, I don't even know how many are up there right now, but quite a few different plans that all relate to what's going into the joint plan. And then this is a story map that we've pulled together, and we'll see if this link works here. Possibly. It's a moment of truth. Seems promising. All right. I'm going to keep moving you guys around. So we'll put you up there for right now. So yeah, we did pull together what is currently a draft Lacey joint plan for the update, and it's really going to function as an online kind of virtual open house that'll be available. Really nice thing about it being online is that it's available whenever anybody has time to review this content. So they don't have to make a certain event or meeting or be at a certain place at a certain time. So it's everything that we're going to be covering in kind of in-person outreach will also be available in this format here. So it's just an additional opportunity to access the content and provide feedback. And I switched mouses again. All right. So this is kind of a scrolling format. It has some navigation across the top, including kind of an overview of what the plan is all about. A description of what an urban growth area is, how they function, how they transition from urban growth areas to incorporated cities, and then the actual content of what is in the joint plan, what's changing, and then opportunities to provide input. There will also be opportunities scattered throughout this document that will allow folks to provide feedback as they're navigating through this format as well, so you don't have to just wait till the end. But yeah, so this is the welcome to the joint plan and introduction to what is contained within this virtual workshop.
Hans,
Yep.
if there's something that should be viewable by those of us online that isn't just a screen that says Lacey joint plan update, we don't see anything else.
Uh-oh.
Thank you. I thought it was just me.
Well, I intentionally
Not just you.
Grant, but everybody else should have it. So it's actually in draft format right now. It is temporarily live, but I'm also going to take it down directly after this meeting because it's not ready for public viewing. So you guys are going to get an early look at what this is all about. I don't know if that helped.
Thank you.
There's a thumbs up. Okay,
Yes.
that's good news. Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna fully get rid of my other mouse here so we don't have this issue anymore. Yeah, so introduction, a little bit of a overview of what you will find in the plan, an explanation of why we're doing the update, why it's important, how it fits within other plans within the city. And then an explanation of the urban growth area. This is actually an interactive map, so you can actually zoom around in it. You can search for locations, so you can find out if in fact you live in an urban growth area or not, which is a frequent question that we get at the front counter. So it's good to have a map that helps folks with that. There's also location services is activated. So if that's live, you can actually zoom into wherever you are in the map, so you don't have to find your address. And then clicking home will bring you back to this view here. So that's what that's about. There's a little exercise here about finding where you live. That's not something we record, but just helps folks get oriented and provide more specific content as they move forward within the plan. And then we also have a section on annexations over time. So this is actually a breakdown of all the different annexations that have created what is now the city of Lacey. So you can actually click on these and they're interactive, and it'll bring up a date and a time and actually a link to the ordinance that created that piece of land or incorporated that portion of land within Lacey. I'm not going to run through that, but that's what that's all about. And again, that's something you can navigate in and kind of zoom around. And then this is what's in the joint plan. So these are the different sections that are found in a joint plan. And this is something that's mirrored in a lot of other planning documents. So you also see it in comp plans. It's a lot of the usual suspects as far as values and vision, public participation, natural environment, land use, urban design, housing, transportation, utilities, economic development. So all of that content is in here. These are hyperlinked, but then also by scrolling, you can actually see them one at a time. And then this is where I'm getting into the, you can provide feedback at each section or chapter, if you will. And this isn't fully ready, but this is kind of, it'll be an introduction to each chapter, explanation of what it's about, and then an opportunity to provide, an opportunity to read the actual draft chapter itself and then share feedback. And that's how each one of these sections is structured. So it's continuous encouragement to provide feedback throughout the document instead of just at the end. And then these are additional chapters and examples, and I'm going to try to scroll through these rather quickly because this is a pretty lengthy document, but at least you'll get a quick view of what it's all about. And then keep scrolling here. We have a housing section. We have a transportation section. I have a photo here that some of you may recognize. Public utilities. Economic and community development. I'm going to keep scrolling a little bit faster here. We have recreation. Public services. And then we get into the what's changing. And this is a section where we kind of do a little bit more of a deep dive on specifics that may look different from previous updates. And this is broken out into two parts, one of which is kind of your usual updates. So alignment with Thurston County and City of Lacey comprehensive plans, updates to background information, some things to be consistent with other kind of city requirements, revised formatting and usability, things like that. So these are kind of the things that you'll see anytime any plan is really updated. And then we also have a section that are more unique or specific to this plan and this update. And those include things like updated housing types and mix. So this gets back to the when urban growth areas are incorporated, making sure that those zoning designations are relatively consistent, both within the UGA and the city at time of incorporation. So there's not as much confusion there as may otherwise be. And then revisions to the mixed use high density corridor. So the Martin Way corridor that is currently kind of a project that's been ongoing. A lot of great content has come out of that. So we want to make sure that that's captured within the joint plan. Expanded sewer requirements for new development, updated development standards for agricultural zones, revised urban holdings within the Pleasant Glade and McAllister geologically sensitive areas, incorporations of the 2018 pedestrian and bicycle plan, and then a few community-led zoning changes within the urban growth area that are just worth capturing. And again, all of these are hyperlinked, but then they're also down here with more detail. So it was really kind of folks can jump around and look at the content or sections that they're interested in, or they can kind of review it all in total. So right now we're given kind of a high level scroll of everything. And I'm going to cruise through these again. Yep. And then we have the 3 different zoning locations that are going to be zoning changes within the urban growth area. It's worth just capturing those because they are taking place and it aligns with this update. So we'll get those in there. And then there's also a reminder or final opportunity to provide feedback again at the very end. So both within the document throughout and then at the ending, there's additional opportunities to provide feedback. And we do leave these as open-ended as possible. There are going to be open comment boxes. There's not really any leading questions or anything. It's just opportunity for folks to provide whatever feedback makes sense at that junction. And that's the entirety of that. So that's the story plan or story map as it is today. And
So when was the last time this was updated?
This
Our joint planning?
officially, I think it was adopted in 2003. So it is.
I know the answer to that, actually.
Yeah, there's some quality photos of Rick in
So
there too.
is
So if
it-
anybody,
So I knew the answer to that. Is the reason why this has taken so long is because are we having to lead the way here and say, here's our new joint planning. Here's the ordinance, fill in the county commission and they adopt it, or is it, why is it taking so long to update this?
so I might actually ask
Rick?
Ryan to answer that one, or Rick. 'Cause I'm a little new here, so I can answer how we're going to do it moving forward. But as far as how we've been doing it, I can't speak to
Yeah,
that.
so we are bound by countywide planning policies within Thurston County that says how joint planning will work. And joint planning is led by the cities. And so in theory, the way it would work is that we lead the update of our comprehensive plan, and then that is reflected back in the joint plan that's adopted with Thurston County. Because of staffing and other capacity issues, Thurston County hasn't been able to essentially get to our joint plan update in a number of years. They have successfully completed the Tumwater joint plan. They are almost to the end of the Olympia joint plan, and now we're finally to the Lacey joint plan. So our hope is that, and our schedule is to get this done in front of the county commissioners for adoption by the end of the year. This will take a significant amount of planning commission time because we will be holding a number of joint work sessions with Thurston County's Planning Commission and eventually a joint hearing with Thurston County's Planning Commission as well. So the good news is that while it's taken us a long time to get there, not because of any fault of our own, we are on the schedule for this year, and we do have their staff resources and dedication to be able to complete this within this year. Correct. Correct. That's right, exactly. And that, yeah, yep. And Tumwater does as well. Tumwater did a large annexation 5-6 years ago. So they have a really small urban growth area as well. But the difference is that we have almost a city's worth of population in our urban growth area. Almost probably more than 30,000 people in our urban growth area. So unfortunately, they picked the easier ones to do first. And so this is going to take a heavier lift from them to be able to complete. The good thing is, and I'll explain when we get to the comp plan part of the presentation, we've done a lot of outreach, and we did a lot of outreach when we did our comprehensive plan update in the urban growth area. We actually took the planning commission on the road and went to a couple Olympic View Elementary and Mountain View as well. So we were actually talking about UGA specific issues when we were out there, and that was 2016. Yeah, yep, Evergreen Forest, yep. So you know, we did a lot of outreach then. The thing is now is that we're in a mode of having to almost be like, hey, remember when we went through this, you know, 7 years ago? And that's what the story map is really a lot about, is trying to kind of, you know, reinforming people that what we've done and where we're going, and giving them an opportunity again to be like, oh, okay, now I understand, now be able to weigh in again on these subjects.
I had a quick question. So does their adoption mean that their development standards have to conform to our guidelines once they accept this and they adopt it, or does it mean they can still just build neighborhoods without sidewalks?
So the way that this will work in terms of a logical sequence of events is that, number one, they'll adopt the joint plan. And then the second part of that will be an eventual adoption of the codes that apply to the urban growth area. So the development regulations will come after this. So that'll actually come in the next year or two, will be an update of development codes, because a lot of the development codes in the urban growth area are still 2003 development codes. We've been in discussion with their staff that we believe that the easiest way to be able to do that is essentially repeal everything that they've done and replace it with Lacey codes. They are not as excited about that as we are. And so I would suggest, if you have discussions with Thurston County counterparts, that maybe you suggest that be a way we can achieve that quickly and easily, and rather than piecemealing and surgically getting in there and changing things, being, you know, taking that, repealing and replacing with what is currently on the books here in Lacey.
Can you make sure you're...
What is their issue? Why are they less excited about that option than we are?
I think it's about control. I think it's about just wanting to have influence over development codes in the urban growth area. And, you know, again, getting back to the whole idea of joint planning is everything is consistent. And so if and when the city's ready to annex something, it's been developed at a consistent level of infrastructure and those kinds of things. So when it comes in, it looks like Lacey, right? And that's not right now. If you look at our codes, that's not exactly how things go. It's, you know, we have a lot of inconsistencies when it comes to development standards, densities of development, and those kinds of things. And really for us, I think at the staff level, it's concerning mostly about the development densities, because we have such a limited amount of urban growth area left. Not a lot of it is at a high enough density to be able to meet our capacity needs for the next 20 years plus. So, you know, the faster we run out of those developable lands at a lower density, the more we'll have to do more upzoning in the city to be able to hold that capacity.
And I would add on just a little bit too. I think it's a little bit also just a mentality, because the county is a very large county and diverse. So you have the rural component, South County, and these 3 urban growth areas in the north. And it's the focus. And then also, as kind of Ryan articulated, when we went through the major update in 2015, 2016, we invited them along. Some of them did attend some of those workshops, but they're not necessarily participating. So they're not buying into what those conversations are, what the real vision is. It's coming at the end, and it's juxtaposing, well, these are, you know, older standards. It's how we want to manage this system or cost. So we got to have those conversations. And you know, a lot of it too is, even if it's urban growth area, a lot of people, even at the county level, so that's Lacey or that's Olympia, but really it should be a Thurston County jurisdictional dialogue, that shared vision. And that's what we got to get to, is that shared vision and that buy-in.
Is there any other questions before I jump in here? So Rick knows where I'm coming with with this. I've been advocating for quite a while now that the county should not be doing permitting within our urban growth area at all. And I've had this conversations with several of the county commissioners, one-on-one conversations, and just yesterday, I received a phone call from a developer who wants to do a neighborhood in our urban growth area. And he is begging and pleading for Lacey to manage his project. He doesn't care if it costs more money. He doesn't care if there's a surcharge. He knows that it will take 18 months, if not longer, for him to get through permitting with the county, maybe, right? If he's lucky. So this is a capacity issue. It's a standards issue. And the way the system is right now, they're not billing to our standards. We'll get through this process and they still have to take another step, and they may or may not adopt our ordinance that adopts our codes. How we get past this is that we sign a deal with the county that says, hey, we will do all the permitting within our urban growth area, and then we can guarantee it gets built to our standards. I think there is movement. I think there's some understanding, at least at the elected official level, of taking this next step. Now, the big question is boy, we're adopting an area larger than the city of Tumwater. What will that mean for staffing? And that is a legitimate concern. However, we could get started with only new permits. We could ease into this. It just matters of coming together and agreeing to how we get started. We first said, okay, let's get started on the Martin Way corridor. There's been some talks about that. Yes, okay. I just asked Rick, so where are we at on that? I think that this needs to be our goal. I think our goal should be Lacey taking over our permitting in our urban growth area. We know for a long time that we've known for as long as I've been on council, and we've known for, the TRPC's going back to, 20 something years, the majority of the buildable lands left in Thurston County within the urban growth areas is in Lacey's UGA. This is not like some surprise, but we can't meet those. We can't meet the population forecasts as long as the county's in charge of permitting, because it takes too long. And as we've just seen, that their densities are not at the level necessary either. So it's a two-pronged reason why we're not keeping up with housing in Thurston County. So you know where I stand. I've been barking about this for a while. It sounds like our counterparts on the elected officials side, at least, is in agreement with us. So what's the next steps?
Well, and I'll say a few things and kind of shed some little bit light. And I want to see what the planning commission and some of the other folks may have for questions or comments. But one of the things as it is something that's been talked about at the council level. It is memorialized in the list of priorities that was just worked on by council and adopted by council a couple of months ago, to look at this as a multi-year process to get to the point of looking at either permitting or annexation. But some of the first steps are making sure there's consistency, because when you go into another jurisdiction, we don't bring our codes with us. They have to be adopted by the jurisdictional authority. So as Hans and Ryan have talked about just a little bit ago, the challenge, not challenge, but the working towards the joint plan, getting that consistent adoption of regulations will go a long ways to getting us to that point where we have some more consideration about how do we look at permitting or annexation of the urban growth area. The mayor also mentioned the Martin Way corridor. That may be something that could be looked at, sooner, because we have the Martin Way corridor study that's going on that it has involvement from interstate transit, Olympia, the county, and Lacey, and that should be looking at a update and of new codes along that corridor that should be all adopted by those jurisdictions or considered by all those jurisdictions. That's another piece was, what's the county do once that does happen? What's the staff do in terms of implementation? And how do you manage that so there is consistent application of that new vision and subsequent codes to development along that Martin Way corridor? So there's a couple of steps there, but the biggest piece is the first step is trying to work towards consistency of not only land use designation and comp plan work, but also development regulations. And then you can start looking at how does another jurisdiction either, contract for permitting or annex that area. Councilmember Green.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, even if we took over the permit in the EPA, took it over today, they still would have to be enforcing their code, not ours in the EPA.
Yes.
We wouldn't solve the problem unless we got them to adopt our code.
Correct.
Yeah, but we could solve that with an ordinance that they agree that they're gonna follow, right?
But that'd be a step that they would have to take in order to achieve what I think I hear was the goal of the council and planning commission. But those are steps that would have to be taken. And then also, the elected leadership of the county will also have to use their public process and get feedback from their constituency as well. And if you go into new standards and new updates and regulations, there's always that conflict with, at least sometimes there's conflict with land use. How does that conflict sort out between two jurisdictional bodies that are governing the same place?
Yeah.
Any planning commission members have questions or thoughts on that? Or observations?
So, one.
How's this? So just one consideration is staffing. So if you said you wanted to do this and you said hire the staff to do this, we have a lot of vacancies right now. Everybody knows that there's a shortage of skilled employees. So if we were, say, to be directed to do this, there would be a lag time to get the people to do this. So in the meantime, it would mean taking on more work, which would then cause delays to the developers from the city. And I think the slide that Grant showed earlier that showed the volume of projects that have been submitted is, the highest this year as it's on any of those previous years that Grant showed on his slide. So that's something to keep in mind, is staffing is a challenge right now.
I am totally aware of that. You think staffing is a challenge for us and it takes a while for us to get anything accomplished. Look how long it's taken things in the county, right? And so, we can still put a priority on the city projects first. And even doing that, it won't take 18 months to get a plot approval in our urban growth area. So I get what you're saying. I also know that we took it overall tomorrow. It's not like tomorrow everyone's gonna start developing and we're gonna have this huge influx, right? Projects happen onesie twosies. And I think we would see more construction in the urban growth area because people would actually know that there's a process in place that's predictable and straightforward, and they can get their plans approved and build something. But so I think that we'd see an uptick, but we all know we're in a housing crisis. It's time for us to do something about it. And I think we should be responsible for our urban growth area and not the county. So I'm gonna stick to that.
So if I could add to Councilmember Greenstein's point, until the county actually, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
To Councilmember Greenstein's point, until the county actually updates their land use regulations and development codes, we'd simply be permitting development that we don't like the development standards for faster.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that, but there's no way that I would agree to adopt an ordinance that has us follow the county's old. So, you could solve that with an ordinance as quick as, right? The county would have to agree.
The county would have to adopt that ordinance, not us.
Yeah.
And there's a process for updating development regulations.
Understandable.
Is there any opposition with the county commissioners for this?
I haven't seen any opposition.
Okay.
Matter of fact, the conversations I've had was like, yeah, makes a lot of sense. I get it. The county knows that they are struggling to keep up with what's coming across their counter. It's not a surprise, right? And so it's been going on for years, and there's a whole reason, there's a whole number of reasons why that it's taken so long. I'm not gonna say the county, the county is a big county, right? And they have to do a bunch of different things. So I don't think the county should be responsible for it either. So I think we can get to an agreement. I think there's a lot of moving parts. We have to go through the process, but I would like for it to be the goal of this council and this planning commission for us to move in this direction with agreement that this is the direction we're going to try to move. And then the counterpart is we have to reach out with the county and our fellow electeds and say, hey, will you please meet us halfway? So we can get to some agreement. Because there's going to be some tricky stuff in here, right? What happens when you come to a disagreement, right? How do you solve those? How do we cover the permit costs? Because we don't charge 100% recovery costs on some things. We're going to have to charge 100% recovery costs. We're not going to be doing it, right? We're not going to take a dive to do permitting in our urban growth area, but we can figure that all out. But the longer we wait, the longer it's going to take, and the more we're going to be in this crisis of our population not being able to keep up, our housing supply not keeping up with the population. So I think it's a priority.
I don't want to talk out of turn here, but how difficult would it be to create a joint work session with our commissioners and have that discussion? And
I think that should be a part of this joint planning process. Say, hey, let see, we meet, I know we've talked a little bit, you can reach out to Romero, see where they're at. I think it makes sense to have a joint planning meeting with them and talk this through, just so their staff understands where their electeds are coming from. And I think we can move forward and get some process.
If I may, I think there's the hidden rub or the elephant in the room that everybody knows it's not willing to talk about is if you make development standards higher, that means you're going to make them more attractable to annexation. And when annexation happens, then you're going to have revenue loss on the county side. And it's uncomfortable, but it's the direction that's going to go eventually at some point. So at some point we have to implement it. That's the rub, is it comes down to money and control and really power.
So I will be reaching out to the county. I can see if we can look at holding a joint meeting with the county commissioners to talk about joint planning issues. That might be a good way to kick off the joint planning process anyways. And then of course, I just do want to draw back to the recently adopted council priorities that this is a action item on that priority document. It's a couple of years out because we have some of these other things we need to get done as an organization, as a community, as a city first. But some of these things that we're doing are setting up the stage for that. So when we have these conversations, if we start having them now, just remember that could be a couple of years before we get to that actual point. And then also, as it was just said, it also comes down to permitting authority or annexation. Those are both tough topics as revenue sources. If we do permitting in the county, we may get some compensation for some of the permit fees, but that won't fully maybe pay for the time. And you have staffing increases that would have to be done, as Scott mentioned, but also space allowance now in City Hall, because we don't have a lot of space for a lot of staff expansion right now. And we're working on a strategy for that as well. And then, if you look at annexation, and then if you spur development in the county up through that permitting process, then that increase in value and activity is not necessarily benefiting the city. So there needs to be some conversation about that as well. On that flip side, the annexation, again, you take on new service areas, then you're having more of a issue with expansion of city services, staffing needs, staffing level of service that could affect our current constituency or community. And so those are things that need to be considered. And then also you have the county perspective, as Councilman Stedman has mentioned, loss of revenue and how do you balance that? And there's some also, again, going through the legislative process, there's some
this fear of the unknown, because it's really just a shift.
It is.
Over time, like the mayor's saying, it's only going to be 1 or 2 instances a year, and it's going to gradually happen over time.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, you will lose a deputy, but you'll gain 1 in Tumwater, a police officer in Tumwater, or firefighter there, and 2 in Lacey. And really, it's a game.
I think that's what I'm trying to articulate is this is something that has to be strategic. And, you know, in a manner that you look at this situation and look at what is that true impact to the city as well as the level of service to our current residents. And so that just keeping that in balance. And if it's little steps or big steps, that's the analysis that needs to go through, and we have some time to build into that. But, you know, we have some priorities we need to accomplish first.
Okay, well, thank you. I'll keep harping on this, and we'll see how you know, I think even if we got started today, you're right, it's going to take a little while, but I think we're in crisis mode, and we need to move us.
It sounds like,
I think you have to take the lead because there is nothing in it for the county to take the lead.
Yeah.
And listening to all this discussion about, you know, who permits what and who gets what and where it happens. This is the kind of stuff that drives the average member of the public right
Crazy.
up the wall. They see a lack of housing. They see 18 months to get a permit.
Mhm.
You know, and so you have to take the lead and you have to say, this is what we're trying to fix. And because if you don't, it'll just coast along. It's no skin off their nose if you don't do it.
I agree.
Absolutely
It
agree.
sounds like the conversation has already started. It just hasn't been brought to the table.
Mhm.
And I think maybe once we do actually bring it to a table and start hammering away at it, we might see some progress in a year or two.
Well, and especially when we have the elected officials in agreement with the issue and the problem. And so it'd be different if we had to convince the elected officials this is the right course. But I think we're there with elected officials. So it means how do we get staffing and everything else and all the other, you know, sausage making that needs to happen for this to go through, you know,
So just to put a wrap on it and maybe a little bit of a bow, I'll reach out to the county and see if we can have a couple of discussions and maybe look at scheduling a joint meeting and coincide, you know, with that first step of the joint planning effort, and have a couple of agenda items and relate to this.
in the meantime, council, if you run into our fellow county commissioners, you know, please have a conversation. And I think you'll find that we're on the same page. I really do. So, okay, anything else? Then let's go to our neighborhood commercial update.
Okay. So that's going to be me again, and we are, I think, running a little bit behind on the agenda. Share. That one looks like it. We got a full screen here. There we go. Okay, so yeah, neighborhood commercial community outreach. We concluded our survey last month, and so this is going to be kind of a summary of what we've heard to date. And then at the end, we'll have a few next steps as far as what we're looking to do to continue this update process forward. And I'm going to go a little bit quick here because most of the planning commission has already seen a lot of this content. So bear with me on that because it will look familiar. But yeah, here we go. And I am on the wrong computer again. Oh, man. All right, here we go. So we did, we hosted a hybrid open house format that included in-person opportunities as well as online. We did social media blasts, newspapers, publications, HOA contacts, different distribution lists, city website, and youth council were all different formats that we used to reach out to the community. In total, this is actually kind of a timeline of participation in our survey. So each one of these peaks that you see is actually a different version of a form of outreach that we did, which directly led to increased traffic actually of folks participating in and providing feedback within the survey. And then also at the open house, we had around 75 to 100 folks that actually attended in person. And then from that open house in person, we had special links for each method of outreach, so we could actually track where feedback was coming from. And we had 27 responses that directly came from that in-person component. And then we did actually, so our published end date was December 31st. But we did run that a little long because we did have a few more surveys that were trickling in. We ended up receiving our last survey on January 3rd and then closed on the 5th, just as a general timeline there. Yep. So then questions were broken out into a couple different groups. Some high level demographics is the first group of questions that we're going to see here. Really, this one's getting at a question about life stage. The largest percentage of respondents that gave feedback to this question identified as being retired at 38%. And we'll see a couple other questions throughout that kind of link back to that one as we move forward. We also asked what age group do folks fall into. We have kind of around an even split of those that are above and below the age of 60. That's kind of the general kind of ballpark of a dividing line there. We did get some younger participation, but that's something that we're looking at moving forward, that we're going to look at additional opportunities on how to boost that. And a special thank you to Kathy, actually, because I think most of those came from one of your efforts going to one of the schools. So thank you for that. This was a few more demographic related questions. We had 69% of respondents identified as female. We had 87% of respondents identify as white or Caucasian. One important note here is that respondents did have the opportunity to select more than one race or ethnicity. So that does not necessarily mean that respondents only identified in that way. In total, we had 175 folks that identified as multiracial or something other than white or Caucasian. And then we did ask a income related question as well that you see there at the end. And then we moved into another phase of questions that related more to where folks live and work and how they interact with those environments. So question 1 in this section was, do you live within the city of Lacey? We want to know that so we know where feedback is coming from. And that question, we had 83% of folks that identified as yes. And then the follow-up question was, do you work in the city of Lacey? And 74% of folks actually responded no to that question. Some of that can be answered by the large group of folks that identified as retired, but there still is a divergence there between the number of folks that live in Lacey versus working in Lacey. So that's something else that we can think about. We did ask an HOA question, and really this is more to get at where feedback specifically is coming from within the community so that we can kind of right size each one of these neighborhood commercial districts to kind of the feedback that's coming from a more localized area within the community from that area. So that was this question here. We did see that majority of respondents stated that they do live in an HOA at 79%. And then there's a breakdown of some of the top locations that folks responded from. And then we got into shopping choices and preferences. These questions are still pretty high level. They're not specific to neighborhood commercial districts, but just shopping decisions in general within the community. This question was, how often do you do your shopping or service related needs or get those outside of the city of Lacey? We wanted to ask this question to really kind of figure out where those gaps are and kind of how often folks can actually meet their daily needs within the community versus outside of it. While the largest percentage or response in here was from those that say a few times a week, if you add up those that are a few times a month or less, it's actually a higher percentage at 55%. So still a majority of folks are finding most of their daily needs within the community, which is good to see. And then we did a bunch of open-ended questions, and there's not really a great way to present these other than word clouds. It's a lot more kind of reading for meaning and context and kind of finding similarities throughout. So question 9, and I am going to move these boxes around a little bit so we can actually read those. But what are the most frequent retail or service related businesses you seek out in other communities? So this was kind of taking that a step further and figuring out what kind of services are not currently provided within the community. And for this one, grocery stores and supermarkets was a pretty common theme, both in a general sense, and then folks took it a step further and actually identified locations like Spuds or Trader Joe's or Whole Foods and the co-op as specific types of grocery stores or supermarkets that they seek out in other communities that aren't currently provided at the level that are.
Trader Joe's, grocery stores in general, we have abundant, like crazy amount of places.
And one of the things that we see later on that is kind of relates to that is that it's specific to kind of healthier produce options. Is kind of the type of grocery store that is specifically missed. I think some of these comments are more generalized, but when you kind of read deeper into what these comments are really trying to reference, it's those kind of more specialty markets or healthier food produce options that aren't quite represented as prominently as I'd like them to be.
And also this is focused on area North Lacey. And so on the north side of the freeway, that has been an issue because you have to travel south of the freeway to see in these grocery stores. But as the area around Cabela's eventually develops, some of those services will be eventually coming in.
And that was one of the things that is borne out in the comments as well. So we'll see a little bit more of that moving forward. And then other comments included restaurants, department stores, and medical and health destinations, or other things that folks were seeking out in other communities. And then we got a little bit more specific again with our questions to actual commercial district access. So this is the next group of questions here. And this was a 15-minute walk question. We asked this one for a couple different reasons. It's represented within our sustainable Thurston plans, our TCMP, and then also the community market study all have goals that identify more walkable communities within a certain radius of where folks currently live. So this is kind of a health check to see how well we're doing compared to those goals. For example, the Sustainable Thurston one has a 72% of households should live within a 15-minute walking radius, or that half mile, give or take, by the year 2035. So as of today in the survey, 70% of respondents said no, they don't. So that's something that we can factor in both to this one and other studies as we look forward. And then that's also, as a quick note, the market study and actually where some of these neighborhood commercial districts are located is intended to really kind of fill some of those gaps that are left by our kind of more central business district kind of commercial corridors out kind of towards the periphery. So one of the values of these neighborhood commercial districts is that it provides some of those services in a closer proximity to where folks actually live, so they don't have to travel as far to get them. And then we did a follow-up question of what are some of the limiting factors that prevent you from walking or biking to existing commercial or retail districts? And again, this is still commercial level, not quite neighborhood commercial districts, but in a general sense, and again, proximity, based on that last question and answer, proximity is still definitely the prominent one here that makes sense because they're just too far away is the common feedback that we're hearing there. And then some of the other high level concerns that we're hearing about was safety concerns and preference for driving. You know, we are in the Pacific Northwest. It rains a lot. If you're doing shopping, there's a lot of groceries. Sometimes you don't want to carry all those back. And then the other one was districts are not equipped to accommodate walking and cycling patrons.
Robin, you got a question?
Yeah, just, I don't know if the bottom line, the infrastructure related concerns is a roll up of the safety concerns and, you know, districts not being equipped for walking or cycling, or is that something else that we heard in the survey?
So it's a roll up. So we asked this question and then we did a follow-up question to expand on why you identified the answer that you did. So looking at the safety concerns, specifically lack of sidewalks, narrow shoulders, busy roads, and then also things like districts are not equipped to accommodate walking and cycling patrons. Of those that participated in this question and provided feedback, around 70% of them identified some kind of infrastructure related, access related hurdle that was creating one of the barriers that limited their interest, desire, or ability to access these locations. So moving, and that actually is a good segue into our next question. And again, this was an open-ended one. But yeah, it's really the missing infrastructure to support other modes of travel other than vehicles or single occupancy vehicles is a common theme that we see in this question and then actually throughout the remaining questions that is echoed quite a few times. And then there's also mode conflict. And really what that means is pedestrian scale versus kind of vehicle scale and kind of that interaction. Folks don't really feel safe in a lot of zones walking next to fast moving roads, high traffic areas, things like that. It's not a good blend the way it currently is. And that's something that we see throughout. And then crime was another one that's currently a deterrent. And we see that both in this question and future questions as well. So those are some of the elements of why folks provided the feedback that they did. And we can see in here things like walking, homeless, biking, some of those things you can kind of pick out, traffic. And then we got specific to neighborhood commercial values or districts. So specifically with the zone now that we're looking at. So values and priorities. And then we asked kind of a location question, and it looks like that bumped a little bit. So sorry for how messy that slide is. But we did ask another question about what is the closest neighborhood commercial district that you live to. We did include a map with this question because a lot of folks aren't necessarily immediately familiar with where those locations are. And again, this helps us combine the other feedback that we received at other points in this survey and really kind of direct those to the zones where we're hearing that. So if there's common themes that we're hearing in one location versus another, then we can maybe more right size that to those locations. So that's what this question was about. Ones that are highlighted are undeveloped, ones that are primarily north of I-5. And those are also the ones that the majority or more than 50% of the feedback came from those zones. So that's what we see there. And then question 13 was, how can neighborhood commercial districts support and strengthen our neighborhood communities and businesses? If you read the intent section of neighborhood commercial districts, it really is all about kind of that integration and providing neighborhood scale amenities and really kind of assimilating well within the existing neighborhoods and fabric of the community. So this was kind of getting at how can they do that better? And comments from this section related to community building, supportive infrastructure, gathering spaces, encouraging diversity in businesses types, and then making things more human scale versus kind of vehicle oriented. So getting at that access question, and then supporting local jobs and growth is another one of how they can directly help these and support these neighborhoods that they're a part of. And then comments also identified things like law enforcement, vehicle pedestrian kind of interactions again was another theme that showed up in there. And then whether or not there was a strong need for these locations in general was also a common theme that showed up.
Hey, Mark, so the in-person thing was held at what a spot, I mean, the middle school in Northeast Lacey, right? Salish?
Correct.
So naturally you probably have better attendance from that area, those residents, right?
So
it seemed like it's high for Jubilee residents and people in Meridian campuses compared to.
Yeah, so from the actual event itself, we had 27 survey responses. Everything else was distributed across the community as at large. So yes, we did see those 27 that did benefit somewhat from being closer in proximity, but I think the larger reason that we see such a spike in those zones is really kind of the increased attention around Meridian Market. And I mean, the timing of the study in general really has a lot to do with that. So there's already kind of heightened attention in those communities. So they were well kind of prepared and positioned and looking for the opportunity to share that feedback. So this was definitely a platform that they took advantage of to really kind of express some of those views and perspectives and needs. So moving on to 14, what types of stores or businesses would you like to see in these neighborhood commercial districts? So this one, we see a lot of the same answers that we had from earlier. The primary divergence between what folks are seeking out in other communities and what they're would like to see in these ones is your larger scale department stores. That's not something that was echoed here. Chain stores, things like that, again, are not things that were echoed here, but were echoed in the other question. But things like your restaurants, your grocery stores, again, things like Trader Joe's specifically, Spuds also was mentioned, things like that are discussed pretty prominently within this section. And then you also see things like cafes, restaurants, and medical and healthy produce was another one. Just a whole bunch of different ways to kind of reference that or say that. But when you kind of read through these comments, there's definitely a theme about kind of looking for co-ops or Spuds or Trader Joe's and healthy produce, and kind of that need is kind of echoed pretty strongly throughout. And then this looks like it got a little cramped again, so apologies for that. We did ask a question about identifying your level of agreement with the following statements. And a lot of these statements were pulled from the intent section of what is the neighborhood commercial district. So things like a complementing established neighborhood character, emphasizing and promoting public gathering spaces. A lot of these themes that are currently within the code and specifically the intent section as it's currently written. We just did kind of check in to see how they're doing, how they're performing. Are these things that folks do want to see? And it's really, aside from the top one and the bottom one, those are all things that are currently really in the code as it's written today. And those are really all positively received, things that folks do appreciate, do want to continue, do want to see them carried forward. And then we did ask two other questions. One was kind of getting at that balance of allowed uses, which is more of a traditional zoning approach where each type of use is listed out by name, which can be difficult because things change over time. So predicting in the future kind of what business might be out there is always kind of playing a catch-up game versus something that's more of a design-oriented approach that we do have in some of our other zoning districts. And that one was pretty even split responses on both sides. So that's something that we do want to explore further in future outreach to kind of get more clarity on how folks feel about that. There wasn't really a resounding response one way or the other on that one. And then the other one that we did a question about was allowed residential uses on the ground floor of buildings. Right now it's allowed above the ground floor, but not currently on ground floor. So we wanted to see if that was how folks wanted it, if there was an interest in allowing that on the first floor. And that one was a pretty neutral response. No, a lot of people didn't really care, is what we heard on that one. So we'll explore that one a little bit further to see if there's, instances where people do appreciate that or are not quite a fan of that. But the top one and the bottom one are things that we're planning on really kind of exploring a little bit further as we move forward in this. And then question 16 was, can you think of any example districts that you would like to see these areas modeled after? And this one's helpful because it kind of gets more to the visualizing locations that a lot of times when you're talking about code, it's pretty abstract. It's hard to engage folks and it's hard to visualize. So asking them to identify locations that they go to currently that they appreciate is sometimes an easier exercise. So from this question, we had locations like some Portland neighborhoods, Point Ruston, the Landing in DuPont, Proctor District, more locally Wildwood and Olympia, Port Townsend, the Briggs Village, are a couple examples of example districts. And then the value here is that we can actually look at the code that's connected with these zones and see if there are opportunities for us to borrow ideas or things that aren't quite reflected in our code as it's currently written, and potentially implement those in drafts moving forward and see what folks like and don't. So that was the intent of that question. And then existing anticipated needs specific to neighborhood commercial districts. What are the barriers to neighborhood commercial development? What suggestions do you have for achieving the community vision for these locations? In question 17, the big one was a fear over loss of neighborhood, and by neighborhood specifically residential character. So blending these types of smaller commercial districts with adjacent neighborhoods was kind of the common theme that was borne out within the questions here. And then there were many do view it as possible and as something that they would like to see, but there are definitely conditions attached to that. So things like traffic, hours of operation, kind of human scale versus vehicle scale, crime, safety, and then environmental protections are big elements that would need to really be addressed before survey participants can kind of view these locations as successful. So that was that one. And then we did ask should any of these districts be redesignated or converted to another use? Unsurprisingly, Meridian Market was prominently featured within this one. So we did get a strong feedback on that. Also, the other top respondents there were the ones that are primarily north of I-5 and primarily undeveloped versus the ones that are developed and are to some degree functioning as neighborhood commercial districts are viewed more positively. So there does appear to be a transition over time towards that, but that's something we can explore further moving forward. And then we did ask people to expand on that feedback as far as why they provided the answers that they did. Mm-hmm. And again, catching up with my notes here, there was Meridian Market, again, was featured prominently in this section. Gas stations in general, as you can see by the word cloud there. And then loss of trees and truck traffic, specifically semis. So a lot of these comments are coming from those that live in close proximity to warehouses. There is a disconnect in some of these comments We tried to clarify and identify what neighborhood commercial districts were specifically, but there is kind of a disconnect in some of these comments between just commercial development in general and these specific locations and what they're intended to provide. So really it's that kind of continuity between residential uses and non-residential uses is some of the comments that we heard in this section. And then we did ask kind of the inverse of 18, which is, are there any locations that should be converted to neighborhood commercial districts that aren't currently? And in this section, there are a lot of locations identified along the Martin Way corridor, and then other locations that are actually already are commercial in some other zoning designation, but do have a commercial element to them. So that's again where that a little bit of that disconnect is coming from, that kind of these are just getting sometimes blanketed in just with a kind of underneath the commercial umbrella in general, and not really, there's not that distinction being made between what these are, the intent of these districts versus other commercial districts. And then at the end, we just did a open-ended, is there anything else you would like to share with the project team? We like to include this question at the end of surveys, just because while we do want specific feedback, we want to make sure it's open-ended enough that folks can provide whatever feedback they do want to provide. So they're not kind of limited or led by our questions that we need to have answered. And within this section, there was really a range of city-related topics. Again, Meridian Market did show up quite a bit in this one. Other areas of development, just discussions about what's going on in the community. Relationships of different types of uses, so residential versus warehouse versus open space, preservation of things like trees, and then actually appreciation for the survey in general, which was good to see. So folks did appreciate that the survey was there, it was available, and that they had the opportunity to really kind of share their opinions in this format. So that was a positive. And I think that's actually my last survey related one. So then as far as next steps go, this is kind of an outline of where we're at versus where we're going. We do want to reach out to actually tenants that are located within these neighborhood commercial districts. So we've heard from a lot of just the community at large about what they want to see in these districts, but we also want to hear what it takes to be successful in these districts. So partnering with our economic development coordinator, and we're going to go out and do some interviews with the actual tenants or kind of businesses that are operating within these locations to figure out what it takes to be successful and how we can support that as well. Survey analysis, we've already done some of that to date that you've been, you see, we've ran through today. Research examples, so we're going to look at other districts from other communities. So that question that we hit on earlier, and see if there's any opportunities to borrow from those to further inform kind of our draft code updates. And then share findings with the community. We're going to go out quite a few more times just to kind of keep the community involved, share what we're hearing, kind of confirm that we're on the right track, gain additional guidance, and then share potential codes, do maybe some visual preferencing with those other example communities that were identified to see what folks like, what they don't like, what they're looking for. And then we'll do public briefings April and May, and that's meeting with everybody that's in this room. And then draft neighborhood commercial district code updates is targeting May and June for that one. And we'll do some more public related hearings, recommendations, and potentially council action. It's kind of the timeline.
Great.
And I think that's it.
Well, thank you. As we're going through this process, obviously, we look forward to the end result and maybe changing, updating our this neighborhood districts codes on what's allowed and what shouldn't be allowed. But I kind of want to go back to our stated goals. So we want services, small services like this within a 15-minute walk of everyone within our city limits in our urban growth area. But we obviously do not have, there's dead zones. So don't you think a part of this process should be identifying those dead zones and rezoning some of those areas in there to neighborhood commercial?
I think some of those, well, the obvious one I think is north of I-5. And that's something that we're hearing throughout a lot of the feedback that we have. And those are also the neighborhood commercial districts that are currently undeveloped. So as those developed, a big component of the intent of those districts and why they were cited or located where they are is that they do fill a lot of those gaps. So they're not currently providing that service, but I mean, that is part of zoning and why you identify those locations ahead of time, that when they do develop, they will meet a lot of those express needs that aren't currently there.
But we have, for example, we have nothing in northwest Lacey. Now there's, looks like we have some annexation that did happen, but in the meantime, you know, if you go down Slater, Kenny, you know, go down a ways, you're within our urban growth area, there should be a neighborhood commercial district there if we're gonna meet our intent.
And
There's some other areas. I mean, you can just, you know, do a 15-minute walk and it's like, where do we have and where does it make sense to input more commercial areas?
But also you need to take into consideration, well, what the land use characteristics, the natural environment, because that area, Pleasant Glade area, you're talking about has a lot of, you know, large area sensitive areas. There's not a lot of connection of grids yet. It's still fairly rural. Once you get past 15th, it kind of gets more in that rural area. So those are things that could happen over time, but it's difficult right now to figure out that location to start seeing some of that development form start to occur. And so this is always going to be an ongoing iterative process. So we might not get all the answers in this particular effort, but we can definitely look at what we currently have, where those pressures are. And as Tom said, up in the northeast area, there isn't a lot because those areas haven't developed out yet. Those neighbor commercial sites. I think I'm going to look for Ryan a little bit. We years ago, I think it was part of the Sustainable Thurston. We looked at those nodes and the walkability scores. There's a website that you can do walkability scores. Northeast there, even though we had the roads and sidewalks and everything, it scored very low because it didn't have the attractor uses yet. And so once those start developing, then we kind of probably see some of that activity improve. But that's part of this analysis that we want to verify and reinforce as we move through this process.
As part of neighborhood commercial, you also need a critical mass of people, and those people either need to be in houses or in cars. If you don't have that, then you're not going to have a successful neighborhood commercial district. And so the question is kind of like a chicken or the egg kind of question. Do you zone it first and wait for the people to come, or do you put a neighborhood commercial district where the people are? And so, you know, for that example, like out Slater, Kinney, Northeast, chances are you may never have a critical mass of people that could ever support a neighborhood commercial zone. And so just because you put one out there doesn't mean that it'll develop as neighborhood commercial.
Sure. Any other questions?
One for Han. I noticed gas station consistently on the slides, but what I didn't hear, and maybe it was just me not understanding, is what was there a consistent thought process for gas stations or against gas stations? I just was curious. I mean, I know obviously with the Meridian Market case, there was a lot of hostility toward one, but were you hearing that across the board or what?
So there's definitely a range of responses that we received specific to gas stations. Some included actually asking for them. And also those identified locations are identified as things that folks actually seek out, given there was a large percentage of folks that identified gas stations in a negative context, primarily connected to Meridian Market. So I don't know that we, with the feedback that we have a great opportunity to separate gas stations from kind of the sentiment that is surrounding Meridian Market. So there is a pretty strong connection with the negative feedback that we received in it being linked to kind of recent history. So we can separate that to some degree, but a lot of it is pretty linked one to the other.
Real quick, so I noticed that some of the things that were desired were things that would be very difficult to achieve in a population of 15 to 20,000 people like a Trader Joe's. I just don't know if that peninsula is going to buy enough groceries and fruit and vegetables to sustain such a thing. So how do I get that this is a good jumping off point, but that almost seems like an impossible task to bring something like that there. Do we look at bringing a scaled down version of something like that? Or how do, you know, when we get to the point where we say, hey, we've collected all the data and we want to start, you know, seeing what we can do to fulfill some of these items. And it almost appears as if some of the items are impossible with that amount of people.
Yeah, but we could zone grocery, right, as allowed use and let the market determine if, if they can go there or
What
not.
scale and size?
Yeah, scale and size. They could have a smaller community market. Sure, I know that there is. Yep.
Yeah.
And they decided that it wasn't, the market wasn't ready for them. You know, I mean, it's return on investment, right? No one's gonna spend the money to open a grocery store if they don't believe that it was there to make them.
Unless it's a destination grocery store.
Yeah.
Or a special.
The,
Well, we are way over on time here, so I think we have a good outline. I think we've started the process. We have some next steps here, and I look forward to completing those next steps and wrapping this up on this update. So let's go to our comp plan update and work program.
Okay, give me 1 second here. Death by PowerPoint tonight, so appreciate you all bearing with us on this. All right, so last thing on the agenda tonight is the 2023 Planning Commission Work Program, and this is for the council's review. The Planning Commission has seen much of this already, but actually at the end of the presentation, or at the end of this segment, we're actually requesting that the City Council adopt the Planning Commission agenda for 2023. So this will set forth a couple things, obviously the work program for the next year for the Planning Commission, but it will also set forth a lot of the work that we have to do in the next couple of years, in the next 2.5 years, to achieve our 2025 Growth Management Act mandated update to our comprehensive plan. So we're starting that process this year. I'll go through a lot of those things, but this will be an ongoing work program item for the next 2.5 years. So expect that the Planning Commission will be working on this, for the next several years to come. So the way that this will work, I'm gonna actually go through different segments here of the work program, which is included in your packet here tonight. So first, going through our comprehensive plan amendments, both those that are ongoing, as well as our private application that we did receive for this year. And then highlight that Growth Management Act required update that will take us the next 2.5 years, and really kind of focus on what we'll be doing this year in 2023. Also wanted to highlight some of the development code revisions that are proposed, as well as just briefly touch on joint planning. Joint planning will take up a significant amount of the Planning Commission's time this year, so it's important to talk about, even though we've kind of touched on it already. So comprehensive plan amendments, these are those that amend the city's comp plan, but those that are ongoing. So as I think we've already mentioned tonight, we have the Martin Way corridor study ongoing. This has been about a 2-year process to through multiple partners, both the city of Lacey, but also the city of Olympia, Thurston County, and Intercity Transit, to complete a study identifying transportation and land use improvements and changes along the Martin Way corridor. That process is nearing completion. We have some preliminary recommendations that the city council was briefed on a number of months ago at this point, and that process is we're synthesizing an action plan that will then set forth some of the potential actions that each of the jurisdictions along the corridor can take. So that's the next step in the process. From that document will be coming from Thurston Regional Planning Council, who's acting essentially as the consultant in the role of that project. Next is the capital facilities plan update. So this is a major overhaul to our existing capital facilities plan, and really focusing on our general government buildings and forecasting how those will grow and change as our community changes to meet our required level of service. So these are facilities like City Hall, like our city maintenance shop, animal services, community center, senior center, and others that will grow over time. The next step in this for the council will be a briefing probably later this spring and summer. Right now, we're working on additional alternatives for animal services. One of the recommendations for animal services is obviously to build a new facility there, but we wanted to go through a more rigorous analysis on what can be done in the interim. That facility, as I think all the council at least is aware, is nearing its the end of its useful life. And so we need to make it last another 5 to 10 years. until we can build a new facility. So that will be part of this study in this phase of the project. And then another part of this is City Hall. Analyzing what can be done with a vacated, hopefully, or the soon to be vacated police department part of the building. As well as, we're running out of space here in offices and in our cubicle areas. So what to do to expand our existing workspaces and better utilize some spaces that we have for staff as we grow here at City Hall. I did put a bullet there about the interim update for the police facility. So our current capital facilities plan, which was last updated in 2019, does not identify the police facility construction in the capital facilities plan. It does identify the preliminary design, but not the construction. And so in order to utilize some of the funding sources available for the police facility, as well as potentially, any bonding opportunities, those kinds of things, we really need it identified as a project in our capital facilities plan. And so that will be going to the Planning Commission actually at their next meeting for a briefing and then eventual public hearing and then to the City Council. It's going to be a really targeted update to the capital facilities plan, only touching on the police station, because we're doing this big overall project where we'll essentially repeal our existing CFP and replace it with a brand new one. It doesn't make sense to do a big interim update. It's really just going to be very targeted, specific to the police station. We touched on the neighborhood commercial update process. Next on the list there is the Parks and Recreation Comprehensive Plan. So our Parks and Rec comp plan was last updated in 2017. It's required to be updated every 6 years by the state of Washington. The RCO office requires that we update it every 6 years to maintain our grant eligibility. And so that'll be coming to the Planning Commission here shortly and to the council as well. And then finally on that list, a regular update that we do on an annual basis to keep our 6-year transportation improvement plan updated. And that's the plan that basically sets forth what transportation improvements, major corridor improvements, and those kinds of things we'll be doing in the city over the next 6 years. As I mentioned at the outset, we did receive one private docket application. So I did want to go through that with you right now. This is an application that is to be considered adding to the annual docket. The staff's recommendation is that the council do add this to the docket and add this to the Planning Commission's work program. This property is, I don't know if everybody's familiar with the Gwenwood Retreat Center, but is located at the southwest corner of Hicks Lake. It is approximately 28 acres. It has a mixture of zoning, some critical areas associated with some water bodies, wetlands and that associated with Hicks Lake. But it does have 7.5 acres of high density residential use associated with it right now. That's the current zoning. And so they're actually requesting that designation be changed from high density residential to open space institutional. I've talked to the ownership there and the folks that have requested this, and they believe that the open space institutional designation fits better with their plans for the property. Their vision for the property is to essentially own it and maintain it as the retreat center in perpetuity. It's owned by a group of churches that aren't developers, and so they want to keep it kind of as is. And the best way to be able to do that is that open space institutional zone, which is, as the name implies, kind of more open space, more kind of quasi-government type uses, which would do that. So in front of you tonight is whether to add this to the work program. It's not to consider the merits of the rezone, but whether or not the application should be added. And then we'll do a full analysis and those kinds of things as it goes through the Planning Commission's process. I did want to point out one other thing is this is located off Hicks Lake Road, south of 30th Avenue Southeast. If you look on that map, north of 30th Avenue Southeast are the Hicks Lake multifamily properties. And those are the two multifamily projects that were the focus of some concern from residents here lately. This will not affect those two properties. Those will move forward with development. It will be in this area to the south. That's the Gwenwood Retreat Center that would be considered. This is the property, aerial photograph of the property here. So as you can see, it's relatively undeveloped. There's a clubhouse and some outbuildings and those kinds of things, but relatively undeveloped. And you can see the significant critical area kind of wetland complex that comes to the south end of that site. Okay, So moving on to now what makes up our 2023 to 2025 GMA update. I'll focus on all of these different elements, some of which won't be done this year, but will be done in future years. Those that have the red star in 2023 will be those that at least we get underway. So the first is an engagement and outreach strategy. So as you can see on the screen there, we've got the Envision Lacey tagline, which was the last time we did our big comprehensive plan update. We did a overall update process called Envision Lacey. We imagine doing a fairly similar process to that now, with some additional things added to it, and I'll kind of explain is, first what we're thinking is doing a little bit more education than what we have in the past, specifically things like, and maybe this is a little bit of civics 101, but what is a comprehensive plan, and why do we plan? It seems especially relevant now that we've had such hot topics when it comes to land use applications. It's really important to give our community the background on why we do these things. We want to, definitely gain a broad stakeholder engagement number of audiences, the typical, residents, businesses, homeowners associations, the development community, and community groups. But we also have a number of, or a couple at least, commissions and the Youth Council and the Equity Commission that we didn't have the last time we did an update to our comprehensive plan. So we certainly want to use them to our advantage to vet, ideas and the plan as it moves through the process. And then as well, internal departments and start thinking now about those engagement tools and methods that we'll use. And I did want to bring up this slide here, which was from our last round of our Envision Lacey. So we did a broad number of things. We did open houses right here in this room. We did, this is the Cops, Cars and Kids events. We did Military Family Support Day, which I don't believe exists anymore, but that was out at Cabela's. We did PCTV with Paul Enns, and all kinds of different presentations to community groups, the Lions Clubs, the Kiwanis, the Rotaries, and those kinds of things. And we expect to do that again. And we got a lot of really good mileage out of all those discussions and presentations as we move through that comp plan update process. I would expect that we would do that again this time. And as I mentioned earlier, we also did the Lacey Planning Commission on the road, and that's that middle kind of graphic there is an invite that was put into water bills for people to go to Evergreen Forest and Olympic View Elementary to talk, hear a presentation and provide feedback on an update to our comprehensive plan. Those were really successful as well. I think one of the interesting things as we move forward is that, especially given some of these controversial land use applications, I think we have a much more engaged citizenry than we did 10 years ago when we went through this. 10 years ago, we really had to go where people were to make this successful. So that's why we went to the events and those kinds of things, did the Speakers Bureau. I think now, just naturally, we've got a bigger population. They're more engaged. They're newer to our community. I think we'll have a more successful time engaging, doing engagement that we may not have to work so hard for. I think, last time, like I said, it was really going to where people were. I think now it may change a little bit and it may have a slightly different tone than it did 10 years ago. Talk a little bit about one of the primary updates coming in the next year, at least kicking that off, is our housing element. So the housing element of our comprehensive plan. First of all, there have been some big changes at the state level that are requiring us to plan for housing. So this House Bill 1220 that was passed, I believe, a year or two ago, requires that we project housing needs for all economic segments at the county level, which is a process that's currently underway. And projections shouldn't just consider market rate housing, but it also needs to include projections for emergency housing, emergency shelters, and permanent supportive housing as well. So we need to provide and kind of show our work how we're going to provide housing for all segments of our community. That is brought down. The state basically says you need to accommodate this much at a county level. The county, we're in a working group right now to break that up amongst the various jurisdictions to identify how that's going to be handled for the individual projections. There's also guidance in there on provisions for moderate density housing options, which good news for Lacey. We've already done so much of this. We've got, as council's aware and Plan Commission, I think too, a year or so ago, we adopted some amendments to our zoning codes that allow duplexes and triplexes on any lot of record, which is great. We've already kind of checked that box. Also looking at our land capacity for the amount of housing that we're projected. And then finally examining racially disparate impacts, displacement and exclusion in housing policies and policies to address them. So we need to do a wholesale analysis of our housing policies to make sure we're not excluding certain segments of our population. This slide is a little older than the one I updated before we came into the meeting, so bear with me on this one. So we also have a couple documents that will be integrated into our comprehensive plan that we have completed over the last couple of years that are not reflected in our current housing element, which is the affordable housing strategy and the housing action plan. So we'll take a lot of the demographic and projection information from those and update those, and then also put in the recommendations from those plans directly as policies, goals and policies and strategies within our housing element. One of the things I'll mention that should be on the slide, but is not, is that we are closely monitoring some current state legislation related to housing as well. There's a lot at the state level that's underway that we need to kind of monitor and maintain as things go forward. One of them is actually a bill that would require between up to a 4 to a 6plex on any lot of record. So as I mentioned, we already allow up to a triplex. State law would even go even farther to say a minimum of up to 4 units needs to be allowed on that individual lot. It could be up to 6 if it's within a certain proximity of transit, or it could be up to 6 if 2 of them were affordable. And so we're keeping close eyes on that because that could change some of our land use regulations. There's also a lot afoot as far as permit processing. So making sure that jurisdictions are maintaining their permit processing time, not an issue for Lacey. But as well, there's a lot coming down the pike as far as funding, especially of supportive housing. One of the good news things that we're able to report coming out of this is that we are able to, with now the addition of hopefully a future housing coordinator, move on a request from last year from the Mountain Greens Mobile Home Park to move forward on a study and analysis about manufactured home park preservation. So that's something that the council, I think, is aware of that we couldn't take on last year, but we will take on this year. And move forward through the housing element of our comp plan. Transportation element of our comprehensive plan. So this was last updated in 2012. And again, much like the housing element, we've done a number of various plans and studies along the way that need to be integrated into an updated transportation element, including our pedestrian and bicycle plan, the recommendations of the Martin Way Corridor Study, and the Depot District Sub-Area Plan as well. Our economic development element. So this is both our economic development element and our strategy. This is, first of all, based on some of the recommendations that we've done as coming out of a 2022 economic analysis that was completed by a private consultant. And it does begin with business engagement. So that's how we're going to start this process, is with business engagement and outreach and building actually on what's coming out of the neighborhood commercial zone. And this again was a slide that unfortunately didn't get updated, but I do know there's more related to workforce and other things that will also be an important thing to be coming out of our economic development element. So those were the things for 2023 coming soon. These will be the, excuse me, the items that are updated in 2025. Give me 1 second. For our overall comp plan update. So this would include our land use element. So you can see here that it would revise the, wow, my voice is really raspy. Revising the demographics and projections, focusing on, much like our plans already do, but focusing on sub-area plans and strategies, which is informed by our economic and housing data. Some of the potential amendments, obviously neighborhood commercial, discussed that ad nauseum tonight. Depot District, a potential consolidation of some commercial zones. So looking at potentially a update of our development codes as well to consolidate some things and create potentially a unified development code. And one of the things we want to look at is along the way is the requirements for mini storage. We hear often that we maybe have a little too much mini storage, and maybe we should look at limiting those zones to where they can go in the community.
They make money, they make money.
Yep, they're very profitable.
Everyone has too much crap.
Very true.
And then the environmental element. So updating this to reflect our climate mitigation goals and policies to incorporate policies of the Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan, and making sure this is integrated throughout all of our comprehensive plan elements. Also inventorying our critical areas and other undevelopable lands throughout Lacey. So we do have a significant amount of undeveloped property or undevelopable property in Lacey. So we want to make sure that that is categorized. Also providing an update to our tree canopy inventory. So this was an inventory we completed a couple of years ago associated with an update to our urban forest management plan. And we want to make sure that we're keeping track of that tree canopy along the way. And then producing ultimately an annual report card that we can share with the community as far as what we're doing to implement our environmental element, especially when it comes to climate mitigation strategies. Excited for this too, because we'll also have, as mentioned at the outset, sustainability coordinator to help us complete this work as well. And then the utilities element. This is coordination with our water and water system plans to make sure that the developments that are permitted are not exacerbating our water sewer systems, that we make sure, growth matches growth, that we're growing our water and sewer system to match the development that's going into place. And then also we're required to coordinate with our private utilities. So that's Puget Sound Energy and Comcast. So with that, before I go into development code revisions, any questions on the comp plan update part of things?
Any questions? I guess I just have one. When especially we're talking about the 2025 update. If you look again, another large part of our urban growth area and southeast part of our urban growth area, south of Yelm Highway. That entire area right there is critical areas where they density will never go, right? Which makes you wonder, why is it in our urban growth area if it's not we can't put density there? So to me, it makes more sense that we take that area off of our urban growth area, keep it rural, and shift some of that area to northwest Lacey area, which we're already up there, have sewer. I mean, it can accommodate more growth that way. We don't have quite as many sensitive areas. So what would be the process of doing that? I mean, I can't imagine it's not going to be easy, but it just doesn't make sense that the reason why the UGAs were drawn was to accommodate growth, but we can't accommodate growth there.
Yep. So the joint planning actually through our comp plan actually identifies that might be a future urban holding area rather than it being an urban growth area. So actually recommending that it be removed from the urban growth area. So this is, for those that aren't aware, it's the southeast corner of our urban growth area. It's commonly known as the McAllister Geologic Sensitive Area. The reason that it was originally included in our UGA was because the idea is then it can then be sewered. And so by sewering it, you're protecting the groundwater that's underneath of it. But unfortunately, in a lot of respects, we're no closer to sewering it today than we were 20 years ago. And so it makes a lot of sense to potentially pull that out of the urban growth area. And we've identified that as a future project through joint planning. The thing is that urban growth area sizes are not controlled by the Lacey City Council. They're controlled by any decisions on the size of that or on relocating that is done through the county commissioners. And so that needs to be a county-led process to remove and relocate that urban growth area somewhere else. But we're well aware of it and have proposed that the county take that project on.
Great. Thank you. I wasn't aware of that. Thank you.
And there's a cycle to when the county's required to get in and look at those, and it's a county-wide effort that all the cities participate in. So when we get to that point, that will definitely be a discussion.
Thank you.
All right, so development code revisions, we're almost there. Give me a couple more minutes and then we'll be done. Code revisions, so ongoing, some work that the planning commission just completed that will be coming to the council within the next month or two is some amendments to our municipal code related to illicit discharges and critical aquifer recharge areas. So some amendments there coming out of implementation of our stormwater manual. Is where that's coming from. Neighborhood commercial update as well. So looking at potential zoning changes coming out of the neighborhood commercial zoning update, and then also revisions to our development guidelines and public works standards. I believe the last wholesale update to that was done in 2017. So it's a good time to update those. There have been some interim updates done since then, but for those that aren't aware, the development guidelines are those that basically apply to development projects, things like water and sewer lines, stormwater, basically anything that kind of goes in the ground that's associated with the development project, streets, sidewalks, those kinds of standards. That's where all those standards are contained, or within our development guidelines and public works standards. They apply to both private development projects as well as city projects as well. And then joint planning, I think we've hit this one as well. Just to reiterate, so we talked a lot about all these things, but urban holding areas, that's what we're talking about with the potential modification of our urban growth area in those locations. The one thing I did want to mention, and I'll just move this so everybody in the room can see it, is that it does set the stage for an eventual annexation plan. So I believe it's on the council's work plan for a future annexation plan to be completed. So once we get through the joint planning work, now it sounds like there may be even more to it than just an annexation plan. There may be discussions on permitting and those kinds of things, but I wanted to make the council aware that that is on the radar for completion in 2025. So with that, happy to take any questions. And again, we are requesting that the city council approve the planning commission's 2023 work program.
For time's sake, I will make the motion that we approve the planning commission's recommendations, which will comprise the 2023 planning commission work program. Is there a second?
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Discussion. Planning commission members.
Go-getters on the planning commission, because that's really ambitious.
I also sort of will, this is the time, I know you guys have a full docket. Is there anything we're missing? Is there anything that's a concern that now is the time to be brought up, beginning of the year, beginning of the work program? Can you turn on your microphone?
Just real quick on the manufactured home park preservation study. Let's say we make it all the way through that, and it's one part that specifically is asking, are we potentially leaving ourselves open to make those same adjustments and those same ordinance for all parks in the city?
I just had the same conversation. Rick,
that was my question also.
Yeah.
No, this is something that as we move forward and we want to do a study and report, and we actually are able to use the services of basically an intern paid by JBLM for active duty individual. It's on active duty that's getting ready to transition out, and they're going to come in and get experience in the city, in City Hall and community economic development. And they're going to be taking, one of their primary projects is to start this mobile home park study, and it's going to look at inventorying all the mobile home parks in our the city as well as the urban growth area. Kind of their condition, what's the surrounding land use patterns, what are some best practices from other communities and how they address mobile home park preservation or affordable housing preservation, and develop a list of alternatives. And it could be a mixture or menu of things that could go into place, where you may have some manufactured home parks that are in residential settings, all are surrounding them, and that may make sense to maybe set a zoning classification for it. Or there may be others that may be not so suited for that, but they could have other options to set up standards for if they're redeveloped, mitigating that impact to displacement by providing adequate funds to house individuals or include them in housing that's in the development, or also providing opportunities for first right of refusal and purchasing the park. So there's all different ways that they can be looked at and addressed. And the purpose of the study is, one, to make sure we have good understanding of what are the types of mobile home manufactured home parks we have in this community. What are the issues surrounding them? And then what are those best practices that can fit? So it can be a little bit of a menu of items that the council could and planning commission could consider.
And at this point, it's only a study. They would then bring the results back. There's no decisions being made.
Correct. Yeah. I think we'll be surprised at how many mobile home parks are actually out there. There are quite a few. We know of some of them, but there's quite a few out there that, they're tucked away. You don't see them. There's several in our UGA. And this is critical housing for people, and this is a big deal, right? This is a big deal. And so I understand how important this work is, and I'm really happy we have the intern coming in to start the work. And I hope we get through that process as soon as possible, because right now, in a lot of these cases, they only own their home. Someone can come in and buy the property, and things turn over real quick. And we'll have a group of people in here screaming and yelling at us. So I understand how important that part is, for sure.
And we're really fortunate to have this intern, because this is really what kind of helps us do that. And I don't know what Ryan said, because Ryan met with the individual, but the individual interviewed all the departments in the city, and Ryan was able to say community economic development is a good spot to learn. So
Yeah. And I'd add on that, over parks, don't tell Jen.
Okay, is there any other discussion? Then it's been moved and seconded to adopt the planning commission's recommendations that will comprise the 2023 planning commission work program. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
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 Is there anyone opposed? Then that motion unanimously carries, and we've adopted your work program. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. We love our planning commission and all the work you do. We really do. And with that, we're only 4 minutes over. I don't know how, but we reached the end of our agenda. And so without objection, I'll call this meeting adjourned.